Consider a mystery tonight. As you begin to settle down toward sleep, one king of ancient Egypt built more tombs for himself than any other ruler in history. Not one great pyramid, but three, each one a colossal mountain of stone, each one a house meant to hold his body for all eternity. Together they contain more stone than the Great Pyramid of Giza. He poured the wealth and the labor of a whole kingdom into these monuments, across the long decades of his reign, for a single purpose above all others: to preserve himself, his body, his name forever, safe within the heart of the stone. And when we go looking, 4,500 years later, for the king inside those three great mountains, we find something strange, something that has puzzled scholars for generations. We find nothing. 3 pyramids, and not one of them holds the king. 3 burial chambers, and every one of them empty. The greatest tomb builder in the history of the world lies in none of the tombs he built. His name was Sneferu, the founder of the 4th dynasty, the father of the Pyramid Age, the king who first perfected the true smooth-sided pyramid. He was the father of the man who built the Great Pyramid of Giza. He was remembered, for 1,000 years after his death, as a good and gentle king, a beneficent ruler, the maker of beautiful things. And he built 3 of the largest structures on the face of the earth to be his eternal resting places. Yet his body has never been found. Not in the strange collapsed pyramid at Maydum, not in the great bent pyramid at Dashur, with its 2 mysterious entrances, not in the Red Pyramid, the first true pyramid ever completed, his final and most perfect monument. Somewhere across the long ages, the king vanished from his own tombs, and where he went, and what became of his body, no one can say for certain. Tonight, we are going to sit with that mystery slowly and calmly, and follow it into all its strange depths. We are going to walk through the 3 great pyramids of Sneferu, one by one, and stand in their empty burial chambers, and ask what happened to the king who should be lying there. We are going to look at the disputed scraps of human remains that have been found, and ask whether any of them might be the king himself. We are going to consider the strange echo of another empty coffin, that of Sneferu's own queen, whose hidden treasure was found near the Great Pyramid with her body gone from her sealed sarcophagus. We are going to think about how tomb robbery worked in ancient Egypt, how even the mightiest kings could not keep their bodies safe, and how nearly all the pyramid kings share Sneferu's strange fate: great monuments that survive, and bodies that have vanished. And we are going to ask what it all means. This pattern of empty tombs for a civilization that believed, above all else, in preserving the body for eternity. By the end of tonight, you are going to understand why the founder of the Pyramid Age lies in none of his 3 great pyramids, what the empty chambers and the disputed bones can and cannot tell us, why Sneferu's missing body is part of a much larger pattern that touches nearly every pyramid king of Egypt, how tomb robbers across thousands of years emptied the monuments the kings had built to last forever, and what became, most likely, of the body of the gentle king who built more tombs than anyone in history. You will understand the strange truth at the heart of the Pyramid Age, that the very monuments built to preserve the kings for eternity failed, in the end, to hold them, and that the greatest builders of tombs are the very ones whose bodies we cannot find. And you will understand why this is not, in the end, a story of failure, but a story with a stranger and gentler ending, in which the king achieved a kind of eternity after all, though not the kind he built for. It is a mystery without a final answer, and there is something restful in that, something suited to the quiet of the night. For we are not going to solve it, not completely, because it cannot be solved with what we know. We are going to explore it, turn it over slowly, look at it from every side, and let it deepen. The way a mystery deepens in the mind on the edge of sleep: the empty chambers, the vanished king, the 3 silent mountains in the desert, holding nothing but darkness and the echo of footsteps. There are few things more suited to a long and drifting night than a genuine mystery, ancient and calm and unresolved, that asks nothing of us but that we wonder at it. So let us go back, slowly across 4,500 years to the dawn of the Age of Pyramids, and to the three great tombs of a king who built them to hold him forever, and who is not in any of them. Let the modern world fade away. Let the centuries roll back into the deep quiet of the ancient past, to the desert and the stone and the sealed and empty chambers. We are going to search for a lost king tonight, through the monuments he raised, and we are going to find, in the searching, something stranger and more beautiful than a body, the mystery itself, and the memory that outlasted the stone. There is something almost unbearably poignant in this mystery, when you sit with it. Here was a man who thought about death, and about his own body, more deeply and more expensively than almost anyone who has ever lived. He did not simply accept that he would die and be forgotten. He fought against it with all the wealth and power of a kingdom at its height. He built and rebuilt, and built again 3 times over, each monument larger and more perfect than the last, all in the service of keeping his body safe forever. Imagine the care, the thought, the sheer determination poured into that effort across the decades of his reign. And imagine, then, the strange silence of the result. 3 vast and perfect tombs, and no king in any of them. It is as though the harder he tried to hold on, the more completely he slipped away. There is a lesson in that, perhaps, though a gentle one, and we will come to it before the night is through. And the mystery is not a simple absence, not merely a case of a body that has crumbled to dust, as most bodies do across 4,500 years. It is stranger than that, for within Sneferu's monuments, and within the tomb of his own queen, there are specific, documented strangenesses. Chambers that were entered and emptied, a sarcophagus found sealed, and yet without a body, fragments of human remains whose identity is fiercely debated. These are not vague gaps in the record. They are concrete puzzles, each with its own details, each studied and argued over by serious scholars, and together they form one of the most intriguing unsolved cases in all of Egyptology. We will look at each of them in turn, slowly and carefully, and see just how strange the evidence really is. And through it all, we will keep returning to the central question, the question that gives our night its shape. Where is the king? Where is Sneferu, the gentle builder of mountains, the father of the Pyramid Age? He was buried, we must assume, with all the ceremony and care that his age could provide, somewhere within one of his great monuments. And then, at some point across the long ages, he vanished. When did it happen? Who entered the sealed chambers? What became of the royal body? We cannot answer these questions with certainty, but we can follow the clues as far as they lead. And in following them, we will travel deep into the world of the pyramids and the tomb robbers, and the strange afterlife of the monuments the kings built to last forever. So tonight is a night for wondering, not for solving. It is a night to walk slowly through 3 great empty tombs, and to let their silence work upon the mind, and to feel the strange pull of a mystery that has waited 4,500 years for an answer it may never receive. Let the question settle over you gently, the way the desert night settles over the pyramids. Where is the king who built all this, and where did he go? Before we begin, if you find ancient Egypt as fascinating as we do, take a moment to like the video or subscribe. It is a small thing, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. To understand why the missing body of Sneferu is such a profound mystery, we must first understand the world he lived in, and above all, what the Egyptians believed about death and the body and eternity. For the empty tombs of Sneferu are not strange simply because a body is missing. They are strange because of everything the ancient Egyptians believed and did and built to make sure that exactly this could never happen. To grasp the mystery, we must first grasp the depth of their care for the dead. So let us go there, slowly into the world of the Old Kingdom, 4,500 years ago, and into the Egyptian idea of death. Picture the land first, as every Egyptian story must begin with the land. A vast desert, red and gold, stretching to the horizon in every direction. One of the harshest places on earth, and through it, a single green ribbon, the valley of the Nile, the great river that made Egypt possible. Each year the river flooded, spreading dark rich mud across the fields, and then withdrew, leaving the soil renewed. On that thin green thread of life, in the midst of the deadly desert, the Egyptians built one of the first great civilizations. And everywhere around them, at the edges of the green, lay the desert, dry and silent and eternal, the land of the dead. The very geography of Egypt spoke of the two great realms, the green land of the living along the river, and the red land of the dead in the desert beyond. The Egyptians buried their dead in that dry desert, on the western side where the sun set. And it was there on the desert plateaus above the valley that they built their tombs. Now let us turn to what they believed about death, for it is the key to everything. The Egyptians did not see death as the end. They believed that a person was made of several parts, not only the visible body, but also unseen elements, a life force they called the Ka, which needed sustenance even after death, a kind of soul or personality they called the Ba, often pictured as a bird that could move between the tomb and the world, and other aspects besides. And they believed that for a person to live on in the next world, these elements had to be sustained, and above all, the body had to be preserved. The body was the anchor, the home to which the unseen parts of the person returned, the physical foundation on which eternal life was built. If the body was destroyed, the whole structure of the afterlife was threatened. This is why the Egyptians went to such extraordinary lengths to preserve the bodies of their dead, because in their belief, the survival of the body was the survival of the person, the necessary ground of eternal life. And so they developed, over centuries, the elaborate practices of preservation that we know as mummification, drying and treating the body so that it would not decay, wrapping it carefully, and placing it within coffins and tombs designed to protect it forever. In Sneferu's age, at the dawn of the Old Kingdom, these practices were still developing, still early, but the goal was already clear and central, to preserve the body of the king, above all, for eternity. For the king was the most important person in the whole cosmos. In the Egyptian view, the guardian of order, the living link between his people and the powers they revered. The preservation of the king's body and his safe passage into the next world were not merely personal concerns. They were matters of cosmic importance on which, the Egyptians believed, the order and prosperity of the whole kingdom depended. To lose the king's body would be a catastrophe beyond measure. This is why the kings built pyramids. The pyramid was, above all, a tomb, a house of eternity, a monument designed to protect the king's body and to launch him into the afterlife. The colossal scale of the pyramids, the millions of tons of stone, served this purpose, to create a structure so vast, so solid, so enduring, that the king's body within would be safe forever, protected from decay, from robbers, from the ravages of time. Deep within the pyramid, in a hidden chamber reached by narrow passages that could be sealed and blocked, the king's body would lie in its sarcophagus, surrounded by the goods he would need in the next world, protected by the mountain of stone above and around it. The whole design was an answer to a single question: how do you keep a body safe for eternity? And the answer the Egyptians gave in Sneferu's age was, you bury it in the heart of a mountain of stone. Now we can begin to see the depth of the mystery. Sneferu built not one but 3 of these mountains. He gave more thought, more wealth, more labor to the preservation of his body than perhaps any king before or after. 3 colossal pyramids, 3 burial chambers, 3 attempts to create the perfect eternal house, and yet his body is in none of them. The very intensity of his effort makes its failure all the more striking. The king who built the most tombs is the king we cannot find. It is as if a man built 3 great fortresses to guard a single treasure, and the treasure vanished from all 3. How could this happen? How could the founder of the Pyramid Age, who did more than anyone to preserve the royal body, end up with no known body at all? That is the question at the heart of our night. Let us meet the king himself, briefly, for we should know whose lost body we are seeking. Sneferu was the founder of the 4th dynasty, the greatest dynasty of the Old Kingdom, the dynasty that would build the pyramids of Giza. His origins are uncertain. He may have been the son of the king before him by a lesser wife, and he secured his throne by marrying the royal heiress, a princess named Hetepheres, who would become his principal queen and the mother of his heir. He reigned a long time, most likely at least around 30 years, and he used that long reign to build on a scale never seen before. He was remembered, for 1,000 years after his death, as a beneficent king, good and gentle, the maker of beautiful things. And his son would build the Great Pyramid of Giza, the most famous monument on earth, on the foundation of everything Sneferu had learned. This was no minor king, no obscure figure. This was one of the greatest of all the pharaohs, the father of the Pyramid Age, and we cannot find his body. Let us also fix in our minds the 3 great monuments, the 3 empty tombs that will be the stage of our mystery. First, the pyramid at Midam, on the edge of the fertile land, which began as a stepped pyramid and was transformed into a true one, and which appears to have partly collapsed, standing now as a strange tower above a mound of rubble. Second, the bent pyramid at Dashur, the monument that changes its angle halfway up, with its unique 2 entrances and its 2 systems of chambers. And third, the red pyramid, also at Dashur, the first true smooth-sided pyramid ever completed, Sneferu's final and most perfect monument, and the most likely candidate for his actual tomb. 3 pyramids at 2 great sites, each with its chambers cut deep within the stone, each meant to hold the king. We will walk through them one by one, in the heart of our night, and stand in each empty chamber and ask what happened. But first, let us understand the goal these tombs were built to serve, and how, across all of Egypt, that goal so often failed. Let us dwell a little longer on the Egyptian care for the body, for it is the foundation of the whole mystery, and the more deeply we feel it, the stranger the empty tombs become. In the Egyptian view, a person did not have a body so much as they were. In part, their body, the physical form, was not a mere vessel to be discarded at death, but an essential part of the self, which had to endure for the self to endure. This is why they preserved it with such care. The unseen parts of the person, the K, the life, force that lingered in the tomb and needed offerings of food and drink, and the Ba, the aspect of the soul that could move about but return to the body. Both depended on the body remaining whole and recognizable. If the body was destroyed, the Ka would have no home, the Ba no anchor, and the person might suffer a second death, a true and final death, the annihilation of the self. To an Egyptian, the destruction of the body was the most terrible fate imaginable, worse than the first death, for it threatened to unmake the person entirely and forever. Against this terror, they built their whole elaborate architecture of eternity. They preserved the body through mummification, so that it would not decay. They provided the tomb with food and drink, or with images and lists of food and drink that, they believed, could sustain the K. They filled the tomb with the goods the person would need in the next world, furniture and clothing and jewelry and tools. They carved and painted the tomb walls with scenes of life and with sacred texts to protect and guide the dead, and they sealed the body deep within, behind blocked passages and hidden doors to keep it safe. Everything was designed to preserve the body and sustain the person into an eternal afterlife. And for the king, all of this was magnified beyond measure, for the king's eternal life was bound up with the order of the cosmos itself. Consider what the pyramid meant in this light. It was not a monument to vanity, not merely a display of power, though it was also those things. It was, at its heart, a machine for eternity, a vast engine designed to preserve the king and launch him into the next world. Its very shape, the smooth, true pyramid that Sneferu perfected, may have been a symbol of the sun's rays, or of the primeval mound from which, in Egyptian belief, life first rose, a shape that spoke of rebirth and ascent. Within it, the burial chamber was the Sacred Heart, the place where the king's preserved body would lie, protected by the immense mass of stone, surrounded by the goods of eternity, sealed away from the world of the living. The narrow passages that led to the chamber could be blocked with great plugs of stone. The entrance could be hidden and sealed. Everything possible was done to make the burial chamber an inviolable, eternal refuge for the royal body. And now, holding all of that in mind, return to the mystery. Sneferu built 3 such machines for eternity, 3 pyramids, each with its sealed and protected burial chamber, each designed with all the care and skill of his age to preserve his body forever. He did this not once but 3 times, giving more attention to the problem of eternal preservation than any king before him. And the result, 4,500 years later, is 3 empty chambers and a missing king. The machines for eternity did not work. The body they were built to preserve is gone. This is the paradox we must sit with tonight. The most determined effort at bodily preservation in the early history of Egypt produced, in the end, no preserved body at all. The founder of the Pyramid Age, who did more than anyone to solve the problem of eternal preservation, is himself the first great example of its failure. Why did it fail? That is the question that will run through our whole night, and the answer, as far as we can reach it, has to do with a force the pyramid builders could not finally defeat. However hard they tried, the tomb robbers. For the very things that made the pyramids so precious, the treasures buried with the king, the gold, and the fine goods, made them irresistible targets, and a sealed chamber, however well hidden, however heavily blocked, could be found, and broken into, and emptied, by determined people with time and knowledge and greed on their side. The story of the missing royal bodies is in large part the story of the long war between the tomb builders and the tomb robbers, a war the builders ultimately lost. We will follow that war through the night, and see how it emptied not only Sneferu's tombs, but nearly all the tombs of the pyramid kings. It helps, too, to picture the places where all this unfolded, the great cemeteries of the dead where Sneferu raised his tombs. Along the western edge of the valley, on the desert plateaus above the green fields, the Egyptians laid out their necropolises, their cities of the dead, where the sun set each evening into the land of the departed. At Saqqara stood the step pyramid of an earlier king, the first great mountain of stone. At Midim, on the edge of the cultivation, Sneferu raised his first great pyramid. And at Dashur, a little to the north, he built his 2 greatest monuments, the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid, on a stretch of desert that would become forever associated with his name. These were not lonely, isolated tombs. Around the royal pyramids clustered the tombs of the royal family and the high officials, whole fields of rectangular mud brick and stone tombs, so that the king lay at the center of a great community of the dead. His family and his servants gathered around him for eternity as they had been in life. The necropolis was a mirror of the living kingdom, projected into eternity with the king at its heart. And it helps to remember that in Sneferu's age, at the dawn of the Old Kingdom, the art of preserving the body was still young. The elaborate mummification of later ages, with its careful removal and preservation of the organs, its long drying of the body, its intricate wrapping, had not yet reached its full development. The embalmers of Sneferu's time were still learning their craft, still working out how to preserve a body against the slow forces of decay. This makes the royal effort all the more striking, for even with their still developing methods, the Egyptians of this age poured everything into the attempt to preserve the king. And it adds another layer to the mystery of the missing bodies, for the early mummies were more fragile, less perfectly preserved than those of later ages, and so perhaps more vulnerable to the ravages of time and the violence of robbers. When we ask what became of Sneferu's body, we must remember that it was a body preserved by the early developing methods of the Old Kingdom, not the perfected mummies of 1,000 years later. There is one more thing to hold in mind as we prepare to enter the tombs, the goods that were buried with the king, for they are central to the whole tragedy of the empty tombs. A royal burial was not simply a body in a chamber. It was a body surrounded by treasure, furniture of gold and precious woods, vessels of alabaster and copper, jewelry of gold and turquoise and lapis, weapons, clothing, food, everything the king might need or want in the eternal life to come. The burial chamber of a king was, in effect, a storehouse of concentrated wealth, sealed within the pyramid, and this is precisely what doomed it. For that concentration of treasure, hidden in the heart of the stone, was a temptation almost beyond resisting. The very richness that was meant to honor the king and equip him for eternity made his tomb a target, and drew the robbers who would, in the end, break in and carry off the treasure, and in the process disturb or destroy the royal body they found within. The gold that was meant to serve the king in eternity became the reason his eternity was violated. There is a deep and sorrowful irony in that, and it lies at the very heart of the mystery of the missing kings. We should also pause on what the king himself was believed to become in death, for it raises the stakes of the missing body even higher. In the older tradition, the living king was seen as the earthly presence of the figure. The Egyptians called Horus, the falcon, and in death he was believed to join the eternal order of the cosmos, to rise among the imperishable stars, or increasingly in Sneferu's age, to be bound up with the figure they associated with the sun, the one they called Ra. The dead king was not simply a dead man. He was believed to become an eternal and powerful being, sustained by the rituals performed in his mortuary temple, watched over by his cult for generations. His preserved body in the pyramid was the earthly anchor of this eternal existence, the point around which the whole vast apparatus of his cult revolved. Priests would come to his mortuary temple, day after day, year after year, to make offerings and perform the rites that sustained him. The pyramid, the temple, the cult, all of it depended, in Egyptian belief, on the king's body lying safe within the stone. So when the body vanished, it was not only a physical loss, it was the breaking of a sacred anchor, the failure of an eternal design, the disappearance of the very thing around which the whole monument had been built. All of this makes the empty tombs of Sneferu not merely a curiosity, but a profound puzzle, one that touches the deepest beliefs of the civilization that built them. The Egyptians did everything in their power to ensure that the king's body would never be lost. Sneferu did more than most, building 3 great tombs to hold him. And yet, the body is gone. To follow that absence, through the 3 empty pyramids and the disputed bones and the robbed and echoing chambers, is to follow one of the great mysteries of the ancient world, and to feel, along the way, the immense and ultimately unfulfilled longing of a people to defeat death itself. Let us begin that journey now, and go down into the first of the 3 empty tombs. It is worth saying, too, that the Egyptians were not naive about the danger. They knew that tombs could be robbed. They had seen it happen to the tombs of earlier generations. And so the design of the pyramids was, in part, a response to that danger, an attempt to build a tomb so massive and so well sealed that no robber could ever reach the king. The hidden entrances, the blocking stones, the narrow twisting passages, the sheer mountain of stone above the chamber, all of these were defenses against the robber. The pyramid was not only a machine for eternity, but a fortress against theft. And that is what makes its failure so striking. Even these greatest of fortresses, built with all the wealth and skill of a kingdom, could not, in the end, keep the robbers out. The defenses were breached, the chambers were emptied, the kings were lost. Sneferu built the first great true pyramids, the mightiest fortresses of the dead yet raised, and even they did not hold. For here is the wider truth that frames Sneferu's mystery. He is not alone. The missing body of Sneferu is the first great instance of what would become one of the most haunting patterns in all of Egyptian history. Across the centuries, king after king built great tombs to preserve his body for eternity. And across the centuries, tomb after tomb was entered, robbed, and emptied. The bodies scattered or destroyed, the treasures carried off. Of all the kings who built pyramids, in the whole long age of pyramid building, almost none has been found lying in his pyramid, in his sarcophagus, as he intended. The pyramids built to preserve the kings forever. Almost all stand empty today. Sneferu, the founder of the pyramid age, is the first of this long line of vanished kings, and his 3 empty tombs are the beginning of the pattern. To understand his missing body, is to begin to understand the strange and universal failure of the pyramids to do the one thing they were built to do. So let us go deeper now into the 3 empty tombs and into the mystery of the lost king. So here we are, at the heart of the mystery, ready to descend into the 3 empty tombs of Sneferu, one by one, and to stand in each silent chamber, and to ask what happened to the king. This is the longest part of our night, and we will move through it slowly without hurry. Following the search for the lost body through each of the 3 great monuments in turn. Let us begin at Midam, and then move north to Dashur, to the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid, and in each of them let us look for the king and find, instead, the strange and echoing emptiness that has puzzled scholars for so long. Let us go first to Midam and enter the strangest of the 3 monuments. From the north face of the pyramid, a passage descends, sloping down through the masonry and into the rock beneath, narrow and low, so that to enter you must bend and make your way down into the darkness. The passage leads to a burial chamber built within the body of the pyramid, a chamber roofed with the corbelling technique. Each course of stone stepped inward over the one below, rising to a high ceiling far above. It is a real burial chamber, cut and built with care, meant to hold a king, and when it was entered and explored in modern times, it was found empty. No sarcophagus with a royal body, no mummy of Sneferu. Only the bare stone chamber and the marks of those who had come before, for the chamber had been entered and disturbed long ago. Whatever had been placed there, if anything, was gone. And here we meet the first of the deep uncertainties that haunt this mystery, for scholars are not even certain that Sneferu was ever buried at Midam at all. Remember that the Midam pyramid appears to have partly collapsed, either during construction or later, and that it may have been begun by the king before Sneferu. Some scholars believe that Midam was never used as Sneferu's tomb, that he abandoned it, perhaps after its troubles, and moved his burial plans north to Dashur. If so, then the empty chamber at Midam is not a robbed tomb, but an unused one, a burial place prepared and then set aside. Others think he may indeed have intended Midam as his tomb before the shift to Dashur. The truth is uncertain, but either way the result is the same. The chamber at Midam is empty, and the king is not there, whether it was robbed or simply never used. The first of Sneferu's 3 great monuments holds no king. Let us linger a moment in that chamber at Midam, for it repays quiet attention to reach it. You descend the long sloping passage from the north face down into the cool darkness, until you come to a vertical shaft that rises into the burial chamber itself. And there, in the corbelled chamber, explorers found not a royal sarcophagus but the bare stone, and traces of wooden beams, and the signs that people had come this way before. Long ago the chamber had been reached, and whatever it once held, if it held anything, was gone. Around the Great Pyramid, meanwhile, lay a whole field of tombs, the mastabas of the royal family and the high officials, and these too were entered and robbed across the ages, their treasures carried off, their bodies disturbed, though from them came some of the most beautiful art of the Old Kingdom, statues and painted reliefs that survived because they were of stone and paint, not gold. So the whole necropolis at Midam tells the same story in miniature. The tombs entered, the treasures gone, the bodies scattered or lost, and only the immovable things, the stone and the paintings, surviving. The king's chamber at the heart of it all stands empty, whether because it was robbed or because it was never used, and Midam keeps its silence. There is a further poignancy at Midam, for one of Sneferu's own sons appears to have been buried in a great mastaba nearby, and some scholars have wondered whether the death of a favored son, or other troubles, may have been among the reasons Sneferu shifted his building north to Dashur. Whatever the reason for the move, it means that Midam may have been left behind, its great pyramid perhaps never receiving the king, its purpose overtaken by the greater monuments to the north. And so we leave Midam as we found it. A strange tower above its mound of rubble, its inner chamber empty, its role in the king's burial uncertain. The first of the 3 empty tombs, the search for Sneferu, must move on northward to Dashur. So let us move north, to Dashur, and to the Bent Pyramid, the strangest and most mysterious of Sneferu's monuments, and let us search for the king there. The Bent Pyramid is unique among all the pyramids of Egypt, for it has not one entrance but two, one on the north face and one the west, leading to two separate systems of passages and chambers within. This alone is a puzzle, for no other pyramid has such an arrangement, and no one can fully explain why the Bent Pyramid does. To enter, you descend through one of these entrances, along a long, low, narrow passage that slopes down into the heart of the monument. And you come, at last, to high corbelled chambers, their walls stepping inward to soaring ceilings built with great skill deep within the stone. These are among the most impressive interior spaces of any pyramid, tall and narrow and echoing, hidden in the mountain of stone. And they, too, are empty. In the chambers of the Bent Pyramid, no royal body has been found, no intact burial of Sneferu. Here again, the tomb built to hold the king holds nothing but darkness and silence, and the marks of ancient intrusion. And here the mystery deepens, for the Bent Pyramid presents a further puzzle. It seems like Medum, that it may never have been used for the king's actual burial. The Bent Pyramid, with its flawed and compromised shape, its angle changed halfway up to save it from collapse, may have been judged unsuitable or unlucky, or simply superseded by the greater Red Pyramid that Sneferu built next. Many scholars believe that Sneferu was never buried in the Bent Pyramid, that it was completed and given its cult but never received the royal body. So its empty chamber, like Medum's, may be the emptiness of a tomb never used, rather than a tomb robbed. Two of Sneferu's three great pyramids, and both, perhaps, prepared and then set aside. And it gets stranger, for even the Bent Pyramid is not a single tomb but part of a larger complex of chambers and structures, including a smaller subsidiary pyramid, a satellite pyramid, standing close beside the great one. This satellite pyramid, some scholars believe, was built to house not the king's body, but an aspect of his spirit, his Ka, the life force, that the Egyptians believed dwelt with the dead. It, too, has its own small chamber within. So around the Bent Pyramid there is not one sacred space, but several. The Great Pyramid with its two entrances and two chamber systems, and the Satellite Pyramid with its own chamber, a whole complex of hidden spaces. And in none of them the body of the king. The more we look, the more chambers we find, and the more emptiness. It is as though Sneferu's builders created space after space to hold and honor the king, and every one of them, in the end, stands empty. The two entrances of the Bent Pyramid deserve a closer look, for they are one of the genuine puzzles of the monument, and they bear on the mystery of the burial. One entrance, on the north face, is the usual arrangement found in most pyramids, leading down to a chamber system. But the second entrance, on the west face, higher up, is found in no other pyramid, and it leads to its own separate passage and chamber. Why build two? Scholars have offered various ideas. Some think the western entrance and its chambers may have been added, or changed during the troubled construction of the pyramid, as the builders adjusted their plans. Some connect the two systems to religious ideas, perhaps to different aspects of the king's journey into the afterlife. Some wonder whether one system was meant for the burial and the other for some other purpose. No one knows for certain. But what matters for our mystery is that both systems, both sets of chambers, were found empty of the king. Whatever the two entrances were for, neither of them leads to the body of Sneferu. And there is a detail about the Bent Pyramid that touches our mystery closely, the state of its interior. Within the pyramid, some of the stones show signs of stress and damage, cracks and shifting, and parts of the interior appear to have been left unfinished. This fits the larger story of the Bent Pyramid as a troubled monument, its angle changed in mid-construction to save it from collapse, its interior showing the strain. And it strengthens the view of many scholars that the Bent Pyramid was never used for the king's actual burial, that its problems led Sneferu to prepare his true tomb elsewhere, in the Red Pyramid. If that is so, Then the empty chambers of the bent pyramid are the emptiness of a monument completed for its cult and its symbolism, but never meant. In the end, to hold the royal body, a magnificent tomb, finished and sealed and given its rituals, but empty from the start, its king intending to lie elsewhere. That is a strange kind of emptiness, and a fitting one for so strange a monument. So let us move to the third and last of the great monuments, the Red Pyramid, Sneferu's final and most perfect tomb, the first true smooth-sided pyramid ever completed, and the most likely candidate to have been his actual burial place. If Sneferu was buried anywhere, most scholars believe, it was here, in the Red Pyramid, the crowning achievement of his reign. Let us enter it. From the entrance high on the north face, a long passage descends, steep and narrow, deep into the monument, so that the descent is long and the air grows still and cool. The passage opens into a series of chambers, and two of them have those magnificent corbelled ceilings, rising in 11 great inward stepping courses to a height that soars far overhead, so that the rooms feel like tall, narrow cathedrals of pale stone hidden in the heart of the mountain. These are among the most beautiful interior spaces in all of Egypt, the direct ancestors of the Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid, and in the innermost chamber, reached by climbing up and over from the others, is the place where the king was meant to lie. And here, at last, we come to the most tantalizing part of the mystery, for in the Red Pyramid, unlike the others, some human remains were found. When the pyramid was explored, fragments of a human body were recovered from within, and some have wondered whether these might be the remains of Sneferu himself, the lost king found at last in his final tomb. Imagine the possibility that the founder of the Pyramid Age, the builder of 3 great tombs, actually lies, in fragments within the Red Pyramid, his own perfect monument. It is a thrilling thought. But we must be honest and careful, for the identification is deeply uncertain and much disputed. The remains are fragmentary and were not found in a clear, intact royal burial. They could belong to Sneferu, or they could belong to someone else entirely. A later intrusive burial, or a robber, or an unrelated body, for tombs were often reused and disturbed across the millennia. Scholars have debated these remains, and there is no firm consensus that they are the king. So even here, in the most likely of the 3 tombs, we do not have a certain body of Sneferu. We have only fragments, disputed and uncertain, that may or may not be the lost king. Let us sit with those fragments a little longer, for they are the closest thing we have to the body of Sneferu, and the story of them is itself part of the mystery. When the Red Pyramid was explored in the modern era and its chambers examined, remains of a human body were reported from within, bones and fragments recovered from the interior. Hopes were raised that these might be the king, but the difficulties are many. The remains were not found in an intact, sealed royal burial in a sarcophagus, with the clear marks of a king's interment. They were fragmentary and disturbed in a monument that had been entered and robbed and reused across thousands of years. A pyramid, once its defenses were breached, might be visited again and again over the millennia, by robbers, by later burials, by all manner of intruders, and any bones found within might belong to any of them, not to the original king. So the fragments from the Red Pyramid, tantalizing as they are, cannot be confidently identified as Sneferu. They may be his, they may not. Without clear evidence and given the long history of disturbance, scholars cannot say for certain. And so, even the best candidate for the king's body remains uncertain, a possibility rather than a proof. The Red Pyramid strengthens its claim to be the true tomb in other ways, though. It was Sneferu's final and most perfect monument, built at the safe angle from the start, the culmination of his lifetime of learning. Beside it stood his mortuary temple, where the rituals for the dead king would be performed, and the workmen left dated marks on its stones showing that it was built well into his reign. Everything about the Red Pyramid suggests that it was meant to be his eternal house, the tomb toward which his whole reign of building had been leading. If he was buried anywhere, it was almost certainly here. And so the emptiness of the Red Pyramid, or rather the uncertainty of the fragments within it, is the deepest point of the mystery. For this is the place where Sneferu should be. This is the tomb he built to hold him, the perfect monument, the crown of his reign. And even here we cannot find him with certainty. The most likely resting place of the founder of the Pyramid Age yields only disputed bones, and no sure king. There is a quiet, eerie beauty to standing in the imagination. In that innermost chamber of the Red Pyramid, deep beneath the mountain of stone, where the king was meant to lie for eternity. The corbelled ceiling soars overhead in its 11 great courses. The air is still and cool and utterly silent, as it has been for 4,500 years. This is the sacred heart of the monument, the destination of all that labor, the place prepared with such care to hold the king forever. And it is empty, or nearly so, holding only the disputed fragments and the deep silence. To stand there in the mind is to feel the full weight of the mystery, the immense effort, the perfect tomb, and the vanished king. All this for a body that is no longer here. Before we gather the threads, we should sit with the larger question that all this raises. Which of his monuments was Sneferu actually buried in, if any? It is a question scholars have long debated, and the debate itself reveals how deep the mystery runs. The Red Pyramid is the favorite, as we have seen, being his final and most perfect monument, with its mortuary temple and its dated stones. The natural culmination of his reign. Most scholars believe that if he was buried anywhere, it was there. But the bent pyramid also had a complete complex, and some have wondered whether he might have been laid there after all. And Midim, whatever its troubles, was a finished pyramid with a burial chamber. The very fact that we cannot say with confidence which of 3 great tombs held the king is itself extraordinary. For most people, even most kings, we know where they were buried. For Sneferu, the greatest tomb, builder of them all, we are left guessing among 3 colossal monuments, unable to point with certainty to any one of them, and say, here, this is where the king was laid, and the count of his empty monuments may be greater still. For Sneferu's building went beyond the 3 great pyramids. There is a smaller pyramid at a place called Sila, near Midim, that appears to belong to him, and a series of small step pyramids at various sites up and down the valley that are sometimes attributed to his reign. These smaller pyramids were probably not tombs at all, but symbolic monuments, markers of royal presence or centers of the royal cult in the provinces, and most have no burial chamber. But they add to the sense of a king who built and built, raising monument after monument across the land, and who lies, so far as we know, in none of them. The founder of the Pyramid Age scattered his monuments across Egypt and vanished from them all. We should also ask how we know that the tombs were entered and disturbed in ancient times, and here the evidence is real, if sometimes hard to read. Within the pyramids, explorers found the signs of ancient intrusion passages that had been broken through, blocking stones that had been forced or tunneled around, chambers that had been entered and emptied. The great blocking stones, meant to seal the passages forever, had been defeated, sometimes by tunneling through the softer masonry around them. The burial goods were gone, carried off long ago, and in some cases later intrusive burials, or the debris of reuse, showed that the monuments had been opened and used again across the millennia. All of this tells us that the pyramids did not simply stand sealed and inviolate until modern times. They were entered, probably within a few centuries of their building in some cases, robbed of their treasures, and left open or resealed and robbed again, across the long ages. The war between the tomb builders and the tomb robbers was fought out within these very chambers, and the robbers, in the end, prevailed. It is worth imagining, for a moment, how such a robbery might have unfolded deep in the ancient past, for it brings the mystery to life. Picture a band of robbers, perhaps within a few generations of Sneferu's burial, perhaps in some later age of disorder when the watch on the tombs had grown lax. They know the treasure that lies within the pyramid, the gold and the precious goods buried with the king. They come, probably by night, and they work their way into the monument, along the passages, past or through the blocking stones, tunneling where they must, until they reach the burial chamber. And there they take everything of value, the gold, the jewelry, the fine goods, stripping the chamber and the royal body of its treasures. The body itself, the mummy of the king, they may unwrap in their search for the jewels and amulets hidden in the wrappings, and in doing so they may damage or destroy it, leaving it broken and scattered, or they may simply cast it aside, and then they are gone, into the night, with the treasure of a king, leaving the sacred chamber violated and the royal body ruined. This, or something like it, is most likely what became of Sneferu and of nearly all the pyramid kings. The eternal house was breached, the treasure taken, and the body, in the process, lost. There is a further sobering truth to hold here about what typically became of a royal body once its tomb was breached, for it helps explain why so little survives. A royal mummy was not only wrapped in linen, it was adorned, in the wrappings and upon the body, with amulets and jewelry of gold and precious stones, placed there to protect and empower the king in the afterlife. The robbers knew this, and so, when they reached the body, they did not simply take the treasures around it, they tore into the wrappings themselves, ripping the mummy apart to reach the gold hidden against the skin and between the layers of linen. In their haste and greed, they broke the body to pieces, scattering it, destroying in minutes the careful work of the embalmers and the hopes of eternity. A royal mummy, once robbed in this way, might be left in fragments on the floor of the chamber, or swept aside, or carried off, or simply lost among the debris. This is why, for so many of the pyramid kings, we have no body at all, or only scattered scraps, not because the bodies quietly decayed, but because they were violently destroyed by robbers hunting the gold within the wrappings. When we say Sneferu's body is lost, this is most likely what we mean. Not a peaceful dissolution, but a tomb broken open and a mummy torn apart for its treasures, somewhere in the long dark of the past. And this fate was not unique to Sneferu. It befell, so far as we can tell, nearly all the pyramid kings. Think of it, the whole long line of kings who built pyramids across many centuries, each raising a great monument to preserve his body forever. And almost none of them found lying in his pyramid today. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built by Sneferu's own son, stands empty, its great stone sarcophagus lidless and bare, the king gone. The second and third pyramids of Giza, built by his descendants, likewise, hold no kings. Pyramid after pyramid, across the whole age, stands empty, the kings vanished, the treasures gone, the bodies lost to the robbers. Sneferu is not the exception. He is the first great example of the rule. The pyramids built to preserve the kings for eternity almost universally failed to do so. And that universal failure is one of the strangest and most haunting facts in all of Egyptology, that the greatest tomb-building civilization in history could not, in the end, keep the bodies of its own kings. It is worth pausing on how and when these empty chambers came to be explored in modern times. For that, too, is part of the story of the lost king. The pyramids of Dashur, where Sneferu's two greatest monuments stand, were entered and examined by explorers and scholars across the 19th and 20th centuries, who mapped their passages and chambers and recorded what they found within. In the 19th century, European explorers made their way into the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid, crawling down the long descending passages by lamplight into chambers that had lain in darkness for thousands of years, and found them empty of the king, bearing only the marks of ancient intrusion. For much of the 20th century, the Dashur pyramids lay within a restricted military zone and were difficult to study, so that they received less attention than the famous pyramids of Giza. Only in more recent decades have they been fully and properly opened to careful modern study, and, eventually, to ordinary visitors, so that today you may descend into the Bent Pyramid yourself, along a narrow tunnel, into the ancient chambers, and stand where the explorers stood, in the deep silence where the king should be, and is not, and never was found. Every generation of explorers found the same thing: the chambers empty, the king gone, the mystery intact. There is a deep irony worth sitting with. Quietly before we move on, Sneferu, of all the kings of Egypt, did the most to secure his body against exactly this fate. He did not trust to one tomb. He built 3. He did not build small. He raised the largest monuments of his age. He gave more thought, more wealth, more labor to the preservation of his body than perhaps any ruler before him, and it availed him nothing. The king who built the most tombs is the king we cannot find. The one who tried hardest to hold on is the one who slipped away most completely. There is something almost like a lesson in that, though a gentle and melancholy one, about the limits of even the greatest human effort against time and greed and the long unraveling of the ages. The mountains he built to hold his body still stand, vast and enduring. The body itself is gone. The stone outlasted the king it was built to preserve. And consider what the loss of the body would have meant for his cult in the ages after his death. For the Egyptians believed that the dead king lived on, sustained by the offerings and rituals performed in his mortuary temple, anchored by his preserved body within the pyramid. When the tomb was robbed and the body destroyed, that anchor was broken. Yet the cult of Sneferu remarkably endured for a very long time. He was remembered and honored for 1,000 years and more, revered as a beneficent king, invoked and celebrated long after his body was gone. So even as his physical remains were lost, his memory, his name, his cult lived on, sustained not by the body in the stone, but by the living memory of the people. In a strange way, Sneferu achieved a kind of eternity after all, though not the kind he built for. His body vanished, but his name endured. The stone tomb failed, but the memory held. We will return to this at the end of our night, for it may be the deepest meaning of the whole mystery. And so, gathering it all together, here is where we stand at the heart of our night. 3 great mountains of stone, raised across the long decades of a single reign, each one a house of eternity, each one built with all the skill and wealth of a kingdom at its height, each one meant to hold and preserve the king forever, each one sealed and guarded and given its sacred rights. And in all 3, when we go looking, the same silence, the same emptiness, the same strange absence at the very center where the king should be. That is the shape of the mystery, and it is worth holding in the mind slowly and clearly as a single quiet image before we move on. 3 pyramids in the desert, and at the heart of each a dark and empty chamber, cool and silent, where a king should lie, and does not, and never has, so far as anyone has ever been able to find. And notice how the mystery has only deepened as we have looked closer. We began thinking we were searching for one lost body in one tomb. Instead, we have found 3 great pyramids, and several chamber systems within them, and a satellite pyramid, and smaller monuments scattered across the land, and the empty coffin of the queen besides, and in all of them, the same absence. The more we search, the more empty spaces we find, and the more the single missing body opens out into a whole landscape of emptiness, a whole reign of monuments that do not hold their king, a whole desert full of stone that keeps its silence and gives up no body. It is a mystery that grows larger the longer you look at it, spreading outward from a single empty chamber to encompass an entire reign, and then an entire age of vanished kings and violated tombs. And at its center, still, the same quiet question, the question that has waited 4,500 years for an answer, the question that no explorer, no scholar, no excavation has yet been able to settle. Where is Sneferu? Where is the gentle king who built all of this, and who lies, so far as anyone can find, in none of it at all? We have entered all 3 of Sneferu's great pyramids. At Madam, an empty chamber, perhaps never even used for the king. At the Bent Pyramid, empty chambers, 2 systems of them, and a satellite pyramid besides, perhaps also never used for the burial. And at the Red Pyramid, the most likely tomb, only fragmentary and disputed human remains, which may or may not be the king. In none of the 3 do we have a certain intact body of Sneferu, the founder of the Pyramid Age who built 3 colossal tombs to preserve himself forever, lies in none of them that we can confirm. This is the strange truth at the heart of our night, and having reached it, we must ask, what happened? Where did the king go? We have already begun to answer it, in the story of the robbers and the empty coffin of the queen. But there is more to understand about the wider world in which this happened, the long history of tomb robbery in Egypt, the ages of order and disorder that governed whether the tombs were safe, and the eventual fate of the whole pyramid ideal. To see the lost body of Sneferu in its full context, we must widen our view and follow the long war between the tomb builders and the tomb robbers across the centuries, and see how it shaped the fate of every king who ever built a pyramid. Before we do, let us pause on one more strange and beautiful echo, for the mystery of Sneferu's missing body has a companion, a second empty tomb that deepens and mirrors the first, the tomb of his own queen Hetepheres. Her story is one of the most remarkable in all of Egyptology, and it is bound up with her husband's mystery. For when a hidden shaft was discovered near the Great Pyramid at Giza, sealed and concealed and opened in modern times, it was found to contain the complete funeral furniture of Queen Hetepheres, Sneferu's wife, a bed, a carrying chair, chairs, boxes, jewelry, all of gold and precious materials preserved for 4,500 years. It was a treasure of astonishing richness, and at its heart was a sealed sarcophagus, a great stone coffin. And when the sarcophagus was opened, it was empty. The queen's body was gone, though her preserved organs appear to have been present nearby, a sealed coffin, and no body within. The same mystery as her husband's in miniature, and even stranger, not an empty chamber, but a sealed and intact coffin, with the body somehow gone. We will return to Hetepheres and her empty coffin in more detail later, for it may hold a clue to the whole pattern. For now, hold it beside Sneferu's own empty tombs, husband and wife, king and queen, both with their bodies vanished, both with their monuments and treasures surviving. The lost body of Sneferu is not an isolated mystery. It is part of a pattern that reached even into his own family, even into the sealed coffin of his queen. Let us follow the story of Hetepheres a little further, here in the heart of our night, for it is one of the strangest and most instructive cases in all of Egyptology, and it may light the way toward understanding what became of her husband. The hidden shaft at Giza was found by chance, its opening concealed, and when it was carefully cleared and entered, the excavators found themselves in a small chamber packed with the queen's funeral goods, stacked and stored, rather than arranged as in a normal burial. The wood of the furniture had largely decayed in the damp, but the gold sheathing that had covered it survived, collapsed in place, and from these thin sheets of gold with astonishing patience, the reconstruction of the furniture was worked out. There were the fittings of a bed, a canopy frame, chairs, a carrying chair, boxes, and jewelry, including bracelets inlaid with delicate designs. It was, without question, the burial equipment of a great queen, the mother of the king who built the Great Pyramid. But the arrangement was wrong for a normal burial, and the sealed sarcophagus, when opened, was empty. This led the excavators to a striking theory. They proposed that the queen had first been buried elsewhere, most likely near her husband at Dashur, and that her original tomb had been robbed not long after her burial. In this reconstruction, the robbers broke in, and in the course of their theft, the queen's body was damaged or destroyed or carried off, so that when the theft was discovered, the body could not be recovered or perhaps could not be admitted to be lost. And so the theory goes, her surviving goods were gathered up and secretly reburied in the hidden shaft at Giza, near her son's growing pyramid, to keep them safe, with the empty sarcophagus solemnly resealed as though the queen were still within, perhaps without those who resealed it knowing or daring to say that the body was already gone. Whether or not this theory is correct in every detail, and scholars have debated it, it paints a vivid picture of exactly the kind of thing that could have happened. Again and again, in the age of the pyramids, the tomb robbed, the body lost, the goods rescued or scattered, the truth hidden behind a resealed and empty coffin. And notice what this tells us about Sneferu. If the queen's original tomb near her husband was robbed within a generation or so of her burial, then the tombs of that time and place were vulnerable very early, perhaps within living memory of the burials themselves. The same robbers or others like them, in the same age, could as easily have broken into the king's tomb. If Hedefir's lost her body to early robbery, then Sneferu may have lost his in the very same way. In the very same years his great pyramid breached and emptied, not long after he was laid to rest within it. The empty coffin of the queen is, in this sense, a window onto the likely fate of the king. Both were robbed, both bodies lost, and only in the queen's case did a fragment of the story survive by the accident of the secret reburial to tell us how it might have happened. Sneferu left no such clue. His body simply vanished. But his queen's empty coffin whispers to us what most likely became of him. There is something almost unbearably intimate in this pairing, when you sit with it in the quiet of the night, the king and the queen, husband and wife, who ruled together at the dawn of the greatest age of Egypt, who raised the first true pyramids and the family that would build Giza. Both of them, in the end, robbed of the one thing they most wanted to keep, their bodies, their anchors to eternity. They built and prepared and sealed, and still they were taken, and all that survives of the queen is a set of golden furniture and an empty coffin, and all that survives of the king is 3 great pyramids and disputed bones. The 2 empty tombs stand together across the centuries, husband and wife, a matched pair of vanished bodies at the very beginning of the pyramid age. So we have stood in all 3 of Sneferu's empty tombs and searched for the king, and found only silence and disputed bones and the echo of his queen's empty coffin. To understand why, we must now widen our view and look at the long history that surrounds this mystery, the age-old war between the tomb builders and the tomb robbers, the periods of order and disorder that decided whether the tombs were safe, the fate of the whole line of pyramid kings, and the slow abandonment of the pyramid ideal itself. For the lost body of Sneferu is not a single event, but the opening chapter of a story that runs through the whole of Egyptian history. Let us follow it. Let us begin with the tomb robbers, for they are the great force behind the empty tombs, and they are older than the pyramids themselves. From the very earliest times, the Egyptians buried their dead with goods, and from the very earliest times, others came to steal those goods. The richer the burial, the greater the temptation. And royal burials were the richest of all, packed with gold and precious things, a concentration of wealth greater than almost anywhere else in the kingdom. To a poor man, or to an organized gang, the treasure sealed within a tomb was a fortune beyond dreaming, worth the risk and the labor and the sacrilege of breaking in. And so, from the beginning, the tombs of the wealthy and the royal were targets, and tomb robbery became almost a permanent feature of Egyptian life, a shadow that followed the dead into their graves. The builders knew it and built against it, and the robbers came anyway. Think about the strange contest this created, played out over thousands of years. On one side, the builders working to make the tomb ever more secure, hiding the entrance, blocking the passages with great stones, sinking the burial chamber deep within the mountain, building false passages and dead ends, piling up the immense mass of the pyramid above. On the other side, the robbers working to defeat every defense, finding the hidden entrance, tunneling around the blocking stones, breaking through walls, following the passages to the chamber, and carrying off the treasure. It was an arms race across the centuries, each side growing more cunning, and in the end, across the long sweep of history, the robbers usually won. For the builders had to succeed perfectly and forever, keeping the tomb inviolate for all eternity, while the robbers had only to succeed once. A single successful break, in at any point across thousands of years, was enough to empty the tomb forever. And thousands of years is a very long time to keep anything safe. We are not left to guess about how tomb robbery worked, for from later periods of Egyptian history there survive actual records of it, documents that let us look directly into the crime. From the later New Kingdom, many centuries after Sneferu, there survive papyri recording the investigation and trial of tomb robbers, the examination of the accused, the confessions extracted, the lists of what was stolen. In these documents, we read of gangs of men who conspired to break into the royal and noble tombs, who tunneled through the rock, who stripped the gold from the mummies, who divided the spoil among themselves and passed it to dealers who melted it down. We read of the officials responsible for guarding the tombs, some of them corrupt, some of them complicit. We read of the methods, the tools, the sharing of the loot, the fear of discovery. These records come from long after Sneferu, but they show us the timeless reality of tomb robbery in Egypt, the organized, determined, and often violent business of plundering the dead. And they let us imagine, with some confidence, the kind of thing that must have happened, in earlier ages, to the tombs of Sneferu and his queen, and all the pyramid kings, not random vandalism, but organized theft, carried out by people who knew what they were doing and knew the wealth that awaited them. It is worth dwelling on the human reality of these robbers, for they are as much a part of the story as the kings. They were often, it seems, ordinary people, workers, and craftsmen. Some of them perhaps the very men who had helped build or maintain the tombs, and who therefore knew their secrets. Insider knowledge was a robber's greatest asset, knowing where the entrance lay, how the passages ran, where the chamber was hidden, how the blocking stones could be defeated. In times of hardship, when the state was weak and food was scarce and the guard was gone, the temptation of the treasure sealed in the tombs must have been overwhelming. And so people came, by night, with their tools and their knowledge and their desperation, and broke into the houses of the dead, and took the gold, and in the taking, destroyed the bodies and the hopes of eternity. There is a whole hidden history here of the poor and the desperate breaking into the tombs of the mighty, a shadow history running alongside the grand history of the kings. And it is this shadow history that emptied the pyramids and lost the kings. The safety of the tombs depended, above all, on the strength of the state, and here we come to one of the great rhythms of Egyptian history. When the central government was strong, when the kingdom was ordered and prosperous, the tombs were guarded, the necropolises watched, the robbers held in check. But Egyptian history moved in long cycles, periods of strong central rule giving way, again and again, to periods of collapse and disorder when the central government broke down. The kingdom fragmented, and the watch on the tombs failed. These times of disorder, which scholars call intermediate periods, were the great ages of tomb robbery, when the old royal tombs, no longer guarded, were broken open and plundered, sometimes systematically, sometimes by desperate people in hard times. After the Old Kingdom, the age of Sneferu and the pyramid builders, came just such a period of collapse and disorder, and it was very likely then, in the centuries of weakness after the Pyramid Age, that many of the great pyramids were broken into and emptied. Sneferu's tombs and his queens may well have been robbed in these very times, when the strong hand that had guarded them was gone. And robbery was not the only danger to the tombs, for across the long ages the pyramids suffered a second kind of loss. Slower but no less complete, they were mined for their stone. The smooth white limestone casings that once covered the pyramids, and sometimes the stone of the monuments themselves, were valuable building material, and in later ages, when the pyramids were ancient and their kings forgotten, people came and stripped them, carrying off the fine casing stones to build other things. This is why most of the pyramids we see today are rough and bare, their gleaming skins gone, quarried away over the centuries. And this long process of stone robbing meant that the pyramids were not sealed and untouched until modern times, but were worked over, entered and dismantled again and again across the millennia, their interiors disturbed, their contents scattered, their burial chambers long since emptied and open. By the time modern scholars came to study them, the pyramids had endured thousands of years of robbery and quarrying and reuse, and whatever they had originally held, including the bodies of their kings, was long gone. The wonder is not that the tombs are empty, but that anything at all survived, that we have even the disputed fragments and the golden furniture of the queen, against thousands of years of determined human plundering. almost nothing of the royal burials came through. This is the true measure of the forces arrayed against the preservation of Sneferu's body. Not one robbery, but a continuous assault across the ages. Robbery upon robbery, quarrying upon quarrying, disturbance upon disturbance, through periods of collapse and periods of indifference, for 4,500 years. No body, however carefully preserved, however deeply sealed, could survive such an ordeal. The marvel of the pyramids is their endurance as monuments. The tragedy of the pyramids is the loss of the very kings they were built to preserve. And Sneferu, first of the great pyramid builders, suffered this fate first and fully, his 3 great tombs emptied, his body lost, across the long dark centuries of Egypt's decline and revival and decline again. And so we can begin to imagine the fate of Sneferu's body in its historical setting. He was buried, most likely in the Red Pyramid, at the height of the Old Kingdom, with all the ceremony and treasure of a great king. For a time, while the state was strong and his cult was tended, his tomb was safe, guarded, and honored. But the Old Kingdom did not last forever. In time, the central government weakened and collapsed, and Egypt fell into a period of disorder, and the watch on the old tombs failed. And then in those troubled centuries, or in some later age of weakness, the robbers came. They breached the pyramid, defeated its defenses, reached the burial chamber, and took the treasure, and in the taking destroyed or scattered the royal body. When order was eventually restored, the damage was long done. The king was gone, and across the following ages the pyramid stood open or resealed, entered again and again, until in modern times the explorers found only the empty chamber. This is the most likely history of the lost body of Sneferu, set in the long rhythms of Egyptian order and collapse. Now let us widen further and consider the whole line of pyramid kings, for Sneferu's fate was shared by nearly all of them, and the pattern is staggering when you take it in. Begin with Sneferu's own son, the builder of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the most famous tomb ever built. When that pyramid was entered, its burial chamber held a great stone sarcophagus, but the sarcophagus was empty, lidless and bare, and the king was gone. The most famous tomb in the world, and no king within it. Moved to the second Great Pyramid of Giza, built by Sneferu's grandson, no king. The third pyramid of Giza, no king, though a coffin and some remains were found and long debated, later shown to be from much later intrusions. Across the whole field of Giza, the greatest pyramids ever built, the kings are gone, everyone. And so it goes back and forth across the whole age of pyramids. Monument after monument, king after king, and almost never a body. The pyramids stand empty, a whole landscape of vacant tombs, their kings vanished into the long dark of the robber-haunted centuries. Let that pattern settle, for it is one of the most extraordinary facts in all of history. The Egyptians built the most massive and elaborate tombs ever constructed by human beings, poured the wealth of a civilization into preserving their kings for eternity, and succeeded, almost universally, in preserving everything except the kings themselves. The stone endured, the monuments endured, the names in many cases endured, but the bodies, the very things the tombs were built to protect, were almost all lost. It is as if the whole vast project of the pyramids, considered as a means of preserving the royal body, was a magnificent failure, defeated by the simple, persistent greed of the tomb robbers and the long erosion of time. The kings reached for a physical eternity, and the robbers took it from them, one tomb at a time, across the centuries. This great failure had consequences that reached into the very design of Egyptian tombs, for the Egyptians learned slowly from the robbing of the pyramids. In later ages, long after Sneferu, the kings largely abandoned the pyramid as a royal tomb. The pyramid, for all its grandeur, had proved to be a beacon, a great stone arrow pointing to the treasure within, impossible to hide and impossible, in the end, to protect. And so the kings of later ages tried a different strategy: concealment. Instead of building great visible monuments, they hid their tombs, cutting them into the rock of a remote desert valley, sealing them and disguising their entrances, hoping that what could not be found could not be robbed. This is the strategy that produced the famous hidden tombs of the later New Kingdom, cut deep into a lonely valley, of which the most famous, found nearly intact in modern times, would astonish the world precisely because it was the rare exception, the one great royal tomb the robbers had largely missed. But even most of the hidden tombs were robbed in the end. The lesson of the pyramids, the lesson written first in the empty tombs of Sneferu, was that no tomb, however grand or however hidden, could be kept safe forever from those who wish to break in. It is worth pausing on that one great exception, the near intact tomb found in modern times, because it proves the rule so vividly. Many centuries after Sneferu, in the age of the hidden rock-cut tombs, one young king was buried in a small tomb in the remote valley, and by a series of accidents, his tomb was covered over and forgotten, its entrance buried under debris and the huts of later workers, so that the robbers who plundered nearly all the other tombs in the valley never fully emptied his. When it was found in modern times, it astonished the world, for it still held its treasures, its golden mask, its nested coffins, and, within them, the body of the king. And here is the point. This tomb amazed everyone precisely because it was the exception, the one that got away, the rare royal burial the robbers had largely missed. Its fame rests on the emptiness of all the others. For every one intact tomb like this, there are dozens, scores, of empty ones, robbed and stripped and vacated, their kings gone. And among those empty ones stand the three great pyramids of Sneferu at the very head of the long line, robbed so early and so thoroughly that not even a golden mask or a certain bone remains to us. The one intact tomb shows us what we lost in all the others, not just treasure, but the king himself. The body in its coffin, the face behind the mask, that is what was taken from Sneferu's tombs and from almost all the rest. Let us also linger on the fuller role of the vanished pyramid kings, for the scale of the loss is hard to grasp until you count it. Sneferu's son, who built the Great Pyramid, is gone. His sarcophagus stands empty. His grandsons, who built the second and third pyramids of Giza, are gone. The kings of the dynasty that followed, who built their own pyramids, are gone. The kings of the next great age of pyramid building, whose monuments are smaller and more ruined, are gone, though from their tombs come the earliest of the sacred funerary writings carved on the chamber walls, pyramid after pyramid, dynasty after dynasty. Across many centuries, the same result: the monument survives, and the king does not. When you walk the pyramid fields of Egypt from Midam to Dashur to Giza and beyond, you are walking through a landscape of empty tombs, scores of them, each one built to hold a king for eternity, and almost none of them holding anyone at all. It is one of the most haunting landscapes in the world, a whole desert of vacant houses of eternity, and Sneferu's three great mountains stand at its beginning. The empty coffin of Queen Hetepheres deserves a place in this wider story, for it is our single best documented case of what may have been very early tomb robbery, reaching back close to the age of Sneferu himself. If the excavators were right, and the queen's original tomb was robbed within a generation of her burial, then it tells us something crucial, that the tombs of the Old Kingdom royal family were vulnerable almost at once. That even at the height of the Pyramid Age, with the state strong and the necropolis guarded, robbers could and did break into royal tombs and destroy the bodies within. If that could happen to the queen so soon, in a time of order, then it could certainly happen to the king, either then or in the disorder that came later. The hidden reburial of her surviving goods, the resealed and empty coffin, the careful concealment of the loss, all of it paints a picture of a royal family already struggling, in Sneferu's own generation, with the theft of its dead. The lost body of Sneferu is not only explained by the later collapse of the Old Kingdom, it may have its roots much earlier, in robberies that began almost as soon as the great tombs were sealed. We should understand, too, the collapse that came after the Pyramid Age, for it was the great opportunity for the robbers. The Old Kingdom, the age of Sneferu and his descendants, the age of the Great Pyramids, did not last forever. After many generations of strong central rule, the kingdom weakened, the power of the kings declined, the provinces grew independent, and eventually the central government broke down altogether. Egypt entered a long period of disorder and division, a time when there was no strong hand to guard the old royal tombs, when the necropolises lay unwatched, when the cults of the ancient kings faltered and their names grew dim. This was the age in which many of the great pyramids were most likely broken into and emptied, when the old kings, no longer feared or guarded, were plundered by those who came after. And when strong rule was eventually restored and Egypt rose again, the damage to the old tombs was long done beyond repair. The kings of the Pyramid Age, Sneferu among them, had passed into a time when their tombs were no longer protected, and the robbers had taken their chance. The very passage of time and the rise and fall of kingdoms worked against the preservation of the bodies. And there is a poignancy in imagining Sneferu's cult across this long decline. For a time after his death, priests would have served in his mortuary temple, making the daily offerings, tending the memory of the great king, sustaining, in Egyptian belief, his eternal life. But as the centuries passed and the old kingdom faded, that cult would have weakened and eventually failed, the offerings ceasing, the temple falling silent, the priests gone. And in that silence, with no one to guard or tend the tomb, the robbers could come. There is something melancholy in the picture. The great king, honored and served for generations, slowly forgotten as his kingdom declined, his cult fading, his tomb left unguarded, until at last the robbers broke in and took everything, and the founder of the Pyramid Age was lost. And yet, remarkably, his name was not forgotten, even as his body was lost. For later ages would remember Sneferu with special warmth long after his tomb was empty. That strange survival of the name, alongside the loss of the body, is one of the deepest notes in the whole story, and we will return to it. There is a revealing contrast to be drawn here between what the robbers took and what they left, for it tells us much about why the bodies are gone while other things survive. The robbers wanted gold and precious materials, things they could carry off and sell and melt down. What they did not want, they left behind: statues of stone, painted reliefs on the walls, furniture too bulky or too plain to be worth taking. And so, from the tombs of Sneferu's family and officials, while the gold and the bodies are gone, there survive some of the greatest artworks of the ancient world. From the necropolis at Midam come famous painted scenes and lifelike statues, their eyes inlaid so vividly that the workmen who found them are said to have been startled. From the family of Sneferu comes a strikingly lifelike sculpted bust of one of his sons, a vizier, a real human face preserved across 4,500 years. These things survived precisely because they were not gold, because the robbers had no use for them. And their survival, alongside the loss of the bodies and the treasures, teaches us the strange selectivity of what comes down to us from the past. The precious things stolen and destroyed, the merely beautiful things left behind and preserved. We have the faces of Sneferu's family carved in stone, but not their bodies. We have the art, but not the kings. Let us also give a little more thought to the lesson the Egyptians drew, in the end, from the failure of the pyramids, for it shaped the rest of their history. After the Pyramid Age, and after the long robbing of the pyramids, the kings of later times understood that the great visible monument had failed as a means of protecting the body. A pyramid could not be hidden. It announced itself for miles, a mountain pointing to the treasure within. And so, as we have seen, the strategy shifted from grandeur to concealment, from the towering pyramid to the hidden tomb cut into the rock of a lonely valley, its entrance disguised and buried. This was a direct response to the lesson of the pyramids, the lesson written first and most clearly in the empty tombs of Sneferu and his descendants. And yet even concealment mostly failed. The hidden tombs, too, were found and robbed, all but a rare few. The truth the Egyptians kept running into, across 2,000 years of trying, was that no strategy could finally defeat the robbers. that the wealth buried with the dead would always, in the end, draw those who would break in and take it, and destroy the body in the taking. It is a hard truth, and the pyramids of Sneferu were its first great monument. It is worth stepping back, here, to feel the full sweep of what we have uncovered. We began with a single missing body, the body of one king lost from his tomb. And in searching for it, we have been led outward, across the whole of Egyptian history, into the age-old war between the builders and the robbers, into the recorded trials of tomb robbers and the shadow history of the desperate poor, breaking into the houses of the mighty, into the long rhythm of order and collapse that decided the fate of the tomb, into the near universal emptying of the pyramids and the roll of vanished kings, into the stripping of the pyramids for their stone, into the great exception that proves the rule, and into the lesson that drove the kings from grand monuments to hidden tombs. A single missing body has quietly opened a window onto one of the deepest and most haunting patterns in the whole of that civilization: the long, determined, and ultimately unsuccessful struggle of the Egyptians to preserve their dead against time and greed. This is what it means to follow the mystery of Sneferu's lost body to its full extent. It is not a small or a simple puzzle. It is, in the end, a doorway into the very heart of Egyptian history. And Sneferu stands at the threshold of it all, the first of the great pyramid builders, and therefore the first of the great vanished kings. Everything that would happen to the later pyramid kings happened first to him. The magnificent tombs, the sealed chambers, the buried treasure, and then the robbery, the emptying, the loss of the body, the survival only of the stone and the name. His three great mountains are the opening chapter of the whole long story. To understand the lost body of Sneferu is to understand, in its first and clearest form, the fate that would overtake nearly every king who ever built a pyramid. He was the great pioneer of the true pyramid, and tragically and strangely, the pioneer of the empty one as well. There is one more thread worth drawing into this wider story, and it concerns how completely the robbers erased the physical king, even beyond the taking of the body. For when a royal mummy was destroyed, something else was lost as well. The face of the king, the actual features of the man, the physical person who had lived and ruled. From an intact royal mummy, we can look upon the very face of a king who died thousands of years ago, see the shape of the nose, the set of the jaw, the lines of a real human being. From Sneferu, we have none of this. We do not know what he looked like, not truly, for no certain image of his body survives, and the statues that may represent him are idealized, not portraits from life. So the robbery took not only his body and his hope of eternity, but his face, his physical individuality, leaving us only the abstract idea of the king, the builder, the gentle name in the old records, without the living man himself behind it. In losing his body, we lost the last trace of Sneferu the person, and kept only Sneferu the monument. That, too, is part of what the empty tombs cost us. So the lost body of Sneferu opens out, as we follow it, into one of the great themes of Egyptian history: the long losing war to preserve the royal dead, the rhythm of order and collapse that decided the fate of the tombs, the near universal emptying of the pyramids, and the slow abandonment of the pyramid ideal in favor of concealment. Sneferu stands at the beginning of it all, the first great pyramid builder and the first great vanished king. His empty tombs are the opening of a story that would run for 2,000 years, the story of a civilization's magnificent and ultimately unsuccessful struggle to defeat death by preserving the body in stone. And yet, as we will see, that is not quite the end of the story, for there is another kind of preservation, one the robbers could not touch. And in that other kind, Sneferu succeeded after all. But before we come to that, let us turn to the evidence itself, and to the scholars who have pieced this mystery together, and to the strange theories that gather around it. So we have followed the mystery of Sneferu's lost body through the three empty tombs and out into the long history of tomb robbery and collapse. Now let us turn to the evidence itself, and to the scholars who have studied it, and to the strange theories that gather, as they always do, around the pyramids and their mysteries. For the case of the missing king rests on real investigation, real excavation, real debate. And it is worth seeing clearly what we actually know, and how we know it, and where the honest limits of our knowledge lie. Let us begin with the physical evidence within the pyramids, for it is the foundation of everything. The empty burial chambers, the disputed human remains in the Red Pyramid, the signs of ancient intrusion, the defeated blocking stones, all of these were observed and recorded by the explorers and scholars who entered the monuments across the last 2 centuries. In the 19th century, European explorers penetrated the Dashur pyramids, crawling down the long passages by lamplight, mapping the chambers, recording what they found. Among them was a British colonel who explored and recorded several of the pyramids in that early age of study, and whose careful surveys of their passages and chambers remain valuable to scholars, even now. Later, more systematic study followed, above all the long and careful work of the German scholar Rainer Stadelmann, who devoted much of his career to Sneferu's pyramids at Dashur, mapping their construction, studying their development, and arguing, from the sheer scale of the building, for the long reign that Sneferu must have had. It is through such patient work, generation upon generation, that we know the interiors of the pyramids, the layout of their chambers, and the emptiness at their hearts. The single most important piece of evidence for understanding the lost bodies, though, comes not from Sneferu's own pyramids, but from the tomb of his queen, and its discovery is one of the great stories of archaeology. In the early 20th century, an American expedition led by the distinguished excavator George Reisner was working at Giza near the Great Pyramid. When they came upon a hidden shaft, its opening concealed, descending into the rock. What followed was a model of careful, patient archaeology. Rather than rushing in, the excavators cleared the shaft slowly, recording everything. And when they reached the chamber at the bottom, packed with the queen's decayed but precious furniture, they spent an extraordinary amount of time. Years, in fact, painstakingly recording and lifting each fragile object, reconstructing the gold-sheathed furniture from its collapsed remains. It was this careful work that revealed the treasure of Sneferu, and it was this careful work that revealed the great mystery at its heart. The sealed sarcophagus that, when opened, proved to be empty. The discovery and its puzzle have been studied and debated ever since, and they remain central to our understanding of how a royal body could vanish from a burial that was beyond doubt a burial. The empty coffin of Sneferu is, in a sense, the key exhibit in the whole case of the missing kings, the one place where we can see, documented in detail, exactly the kind of loss that must have befallen Sneferu himself. The reburial theory that Reisner and others propose to explain the empty coffin is worth stating carefully, for it is the best window we have into the fate of the royal bodies. In this reconstruction, Sneferu was first buried near her husband at Dashur. Her tomb was robbed soon after, and in the robbery her body was taken or destroyed. The theft was discovered by the authorities, and her son, the king, unwilling to admit that his mother's body was lost, or unaware of it, had her surviving goods gathered and secretly reburied in the hidden shaft at Giza, near his own pyramid, with the empty sarcophagus solemnly resealed. Not all scholars accept every detail. Some have proposed alternatives, but the theory fits the evidence remarkably well, and whether or not it is correct in every particular, it shows us a plausible and detailed mechanism by which a royal body could be lost while the burial goods and the sealed coffin survived. Apply the same mechanism to Sneferu, and you have the most likely explanation of his own missing body, robbed, destroyed, lost. While the great stone monument endured, the Queen's documented case illuminates the King's undocumented one. The disputed remains from the Red Pyramid are worth returning to, for they are the closest thing to physical evidence of the King's body, and they show how careful we must be. When human remains were reported from within the Red Pyramid, the question at once arose, could these be Sneferu himself? But the difficulties are real. The remains were not found in a sealed, intact, unmistakably royal burial. They were fragmentary, and they came from a monument that had been open and disturbed for thousands of years, entered by robbers, by later burials, by all manner of intruders across the millennia. In such a context, human remains might belong to anyone, from any period, not necessarily to the original king. Without clear archaeological context, and given the long history of disturbance, the remains cannot be confidently identified as Sneferu. This is the honest position. We have some human remains from the pyramid that is the most likely candidate for his tomb, and we cannot say for certain whether they are the king or not. It is a maddening uncertainty, but it is the truth, and honesty about it is more valuable than a false certainty either way. The numbers are striking when you consider the odds against any royal body surviving. Think of the span of time, 4,500 years since Sneferu was buried. Think of the value of what lay in his tomb, a concentration of gold and precious goods worth a fortune in any age. Think of the number of centuries during which the state was weak, and the tombs unguarded, the number of generations of robbers who knew the treasure was there, the number of times a determined person might have tried across all those years to break in. Against such odds across such a span, the survival of an intact royal burial would be the miracle, not its loss. When you do the grim arithmetic, the empty tombs are exactly what you would expect. The wonder is not that Sneferu's body is gone, but that we have anything at all from that distant age, even the disputed bones, even the golden furniture of his queen, even the names carved in the stone. The forces of destruction had 4,500 years to work. That anything survived is the surprise. And it is here around the empty tombs and the missing bodies that the strange theories gather as they gather around every Egyptian mystery. For there are those who look at the empty pyramids and conclude that the pyramids were never tombs at all, that since no bodies were found in them, they must have had some other purpose, some secret function, perhaps as machines or power plants, or monuments left by a lost civilization, or by visitors from beyond the earth. The empty burial chambers are offered as proof that the standard account, the account of the pyramids as royal tombs, must be wrong. So let us meet this claim honestly, and see what the evidence actually says. The mainstream understanding held by essentially all serious scholars is clear and well-founded. The pyramids were tombs, built to hold the bodies of the kings, and they are empty today, not because they were never tombs, but because they were robbed. And the evidence for this is overwhelming. The pyramids contain burial chambers with sarcophagi, the great stone coffins meant to hold a body. They are surrounded by mortuary temples, where the cult of the dead king was performed, and by the tombs of the royal family and officials, exactly as you would expect around a royal tomb. They bear the signs of ancient robbery, the forced passages, the defeated blocking stones, the emptied chambers. In some pyramids of the age, the walls of the burial chambers are carved with sacred funerary texts, spells to protect and guide the dead king, texts that make no sense unless the pyramid was a tomb. And the empty coffin of Queen Hedephirs, with its documented story of robbery and reburial, shows exactly how a royal body could be lost from a burial that was undoubtedly a burial. The emptiness of the pyramids is not evidence that they were not tombs. It is evidence that they were robbed, which is a very different thing, and which fits everything else we know. Consider the funerary texts more closely, for they are among the most decisive evidence that the pyramids were tombs. In the pyramids of the later Old Kingdom, not long after Sneferu, the walls of the burial chambers and passages were carved with long sequences of sacred spells, the earliest large body of religious writing to survive from Egypt, meant to protect the dead king, to sustain him, and to guide him into the afterlife, and in their belief toward the eternal order of the sky and the figure they associated with the sun. These texts speak directly to and about the dead king lying in the chamber. They make no sense except as the furnishing of a tomb, spells for a body that was meant to lie there. Sneferu's own pyramids do not have these carved texts, for they come a little later, but the pyramids of his near successors do, and they prove beyond reasonable doubt that the pyramid was understood by the Egyptians themselves as the tomb of the king, the place where his body lay and from which his spirit would rise. The people who built and used the pyramids left us in these texts their own testimony that the pyramids were tombs. No modern theory of secret machines or lost civilizations can stand against the plain witness of the ancient Egyptians themselves carved into the walls of the burial chambers. There is a scientific dimension to the mystery of the remains too, worth touching on in principle. Modern methods, the careful study of bones, the analysis of ancient tissue, the dating of materials, can tell us a great deal about human remains. But these methods need good material and good context to work. And the fragmentary disturbed remains from a pyramid open for thousands of years provide neither without a clear, sealed, datable context. Even the best analysis struggles to say whether a given fragment belongs to the original royal burial or to some later intrusion. This is why the remains from the Red Pyramid remain disputed. Despite the tools available to modern science, the problem is not a lack of technique, but a lack of clear context, destroyed long ago by the very robberies and disturbances that emptied the tomb. Science can do a great deal, but it cannot fully reconstruct what was scattered and mixed and lost across 4,500 years, and so the identity of the remains stays uncertain, a question that even our best methods cannot, at present, resolve. To claim that the empty chambers prove the pyramids were not tombs is to ignore all of this. The sarcophagi, the temples, the funerary texts, the surrounding burials, the signs of robbery, the parallel of the queen's empty coffin, and the whole vast pattern of tomb robbery documented across Egyptian history. The empty tomb is not a mystery that overturns the standard account. It is a mystery fully explained by the standard account, by the simple and well-documented fact that the tombs were robbed. The real story, the human story of greed and theft and the long failure to protect the royal dead, is stranger and sadder and more interesting than any tale of ancient machines or visitors from the stars. And it has the great advantage of being true, supported by the evidence rather than invented to explain away an emptiness that is already fully explained. We should be honest, too, about the genuine mysteries that remain, for they are real, even when the false ones are set aside. We do not know for certain which of his 3 pyramids Sneferu was actually buried in, though the Red Pyramid is the best guess. We do not know whether the fragmentary remains in the Red Pyramid are his. We do not fully understand why the Bent Pyramid has 2 entrances, or exactly how and when each of his tombs was robbed. We do not know what became of his body after the robbery, whether it was destroyed entirely or scattered or lies somewhere, still unrecognized. And the empty coffin of his queen, though the reburial theory is compelling, is not fully explained either. These are genuine uncertainties, honest gaps in our knowledge, and they are part of what makes the mystery so enduring. The lost body of Sneferu is not a solved case with every detail known. It is a real mystery, with a likely explanation but no final proof, and much that we may never know. And we must remember, as always, how much of Egypt still lies buried and unstudied. Much of the world of the Old Kingdom lies beneath the water table or under later settlement, or still unexcavated beneath the sand. New discoveries emerge from Egypt continually, new tombs, new inscriptions, new fragments of the ancient world. It is not impossible that some future discovery could shed new light on the fate of Sneferu. An inscription, a record, even though it seems unlikely, some trace of the king himself. The ground still holds its secrets. The story is not finished, and so we hold our conclusions gently, knowing that the mystery of the lost king rests on incomplete evidence, and that the sands of Egypt may yet have more to say. For now, the most likely truth is the human one, that Sneferu was buried in his great pyramid, and robbed and lost, like nearly all the pyramid kings. But we hold even that likely truth with humility, and with wonder, and with an openness to whatever the future may reveal. It is worth adding that the study of Sneferu's pyramids continues in our own time, and continues to deepen the picture rather than overturn it. In recent years, the bent pyramid was opened again to visitors, after long being closed and long lying within a restricted zone, and renewed attention has come to the Dashur monuments. New surveys, new imaging techniques, and careful re-examination of the pyramids continue to refine our understanding of how they were built, how they were used, and how they were disturbed across the ages. None of this modern work has found the missing king, and none of it has supported the fringe idea that the pyramids were something other than tombs. Instead, it has steadily strengthened the mainstream account, filling in the details of construction and use and robbery, while leaving the central mystery, the fate of the body, where it has always stood, most likely robbed and lost, though never proven. The more closely we study the pyramids, the more human and the more comprehensible they become, and the less room there is for the exotic theories that flourish in the absence of knowledge. We should also weigh honestly how much remains buried and unknown, for it bears on the mystery. Much of the Old Kingdom world lies beneath the modern landscape, below the water table, under later towns and fields, or still unexcavated beneath the desert. Egypt continues, even now, to yield new discoveries, tombs, inscriptions, whole cemeteries, fragments of the ancient record. It is not impossible, though it is unlikely, that some future find could bear on the fate of Sneferu, a text mentioning his burial or its robbery, a record from the ages of tomb robbery, even against all odds, some unrecognized trace of the king. We cannot rule it out, for the ground still holds its secrets, and the history of Egyptology is full of surprises that no one predicted. And so we hold the mystery open, not because the likely answer is in doubt, but because Egypt has a way of confounding certainty, of producing, every so often, some discovery that changes the story. The lost body of Sneferu is most likely lost forever, destroyed by robbers in the deep past. But we say so with humility, knowing that the sands are not finished with their revelations. There is a further point worth making about the fringe theories, for they reveal something about how we respond to mystery. When faced with an unexplained emptiness, the empty burial chamber, some minds reach at once for the extraordinary secret purposes, lost technologies, visitors from beyond. But the empty chamber is not, in fact, unexplained. It is explained, thoroughly and convincingly, by tomb robbery, a phenomenon documented across the whole of Egyptian history, witnessed in the trial records, illustrated by the empty coffin of the queen, and consistent with everything we know about the pyramids as tombs. The reach for the extraordinary is not required, because the ordinary explanation, human greed and theft across the ages, fully accounts for what we see, and the ordinary explanation is, in its way, more moving than the extraordinary ones. Not a tale of aliens or lost civilizations, but a human story of a king who tried to defeat death, and of the ordinary people who, across the centuries, undid his effort for the gold he was buried with. That story needs no embellishment. It is strange and sad and true enough on its own. Let us also lay out plainly the positive evidence that the pyramids were tombs, for it is worth having it all in one place. First, the sarcophagi. Within the burial chambers stand great stone coffins made to hold a body, and in some cases their lids and fragments survive, empty. A sarcophagus is a coffin. Its presence declares the purpose of the chamber. Second, the surrounding complexes. Each pyramid stands at the center of a funerary complex, with a mortuary temple for the cult of the dead king, a causeway, and often a valley temple, exactly the architecture of a royal burial. Third, the surrounding tombs around the pyramids cluster the tombs of the royal family and the high officials, gathered around their king in death as in life, precisely as you would expect around a royal tomb. Fourth, the funerary texts in the pyramids of the age, spells for the dead king. Fifth, the signs of robbery, the forced passages and defeated seals, showing that the chambers were entered and emptied. And sixth, the parallel of the queen's empty coffin, a documented case of a royal body lost from a certain burial. Together, these lines of evidence make the conclusion inescapable. The pyramids were tombs, and they are empty because they were robbed. There is no serious doubt about this among those who study the evidence, And there is a quiet human lesson in how the evidence itself has survived, or failed to survive. The gold was taken, the bodies were destroyed, but the stone remained, and on and in the stone, the things that could not be carried off, the empty sarcophagi, the carved texts, the reliefs, the architecture, the names. From these durable, unstealable things, the patient work of scholars has reconstructed the story, not only of how the pyramids were built and used, but of how they were robbed and emptied. It is a story pieced together from what the robbers left behind, from the stone that was too heavy to steal and the writing that was worth nothing to melt down. In a sense, the robbers, by taking the gold and leaving the stone, unwittingly preserved the deeper record, the record of the pyramids as tombs and of the civilization that built them. They took the treasure and the bodies, but they left the truth carved and built into the enduring stone. And from that truth, we have recovered the story of the lost king, even without his body. It is worth returning, one more time, to the sheer weight of time that separates us from Sneferu's burial, for it puts the missing body in its true perspective, 4,500 years. Think of how many generations that is, how many rises and falls of kingdoms, how many ages of order and disorder, how many opportunities for robbery and disturbance and decay. A wooden object left unprotected for such a span would crumble to dust. A body, even one carefully preserved by the early methods of the Old Kingdom, would face 4,500 years of moisture, insects, decay, and above all, the hands of robbers hunting the gold in its wrappings. Set against this, the survival of any royal body from that age would be extraordinary. The survival of the golden furniture of Hetepheres, by the accident of its secret reburial, is already something close to a miracle. When we ask why Sneferu's body is gone, we should really turn the question around and ask how anything at all from his world survived. The answer is only the most durable things, the stone and the carved word, and the occasional hidden cache, came through. The body was never likely to be among them. Its loss is not a special mystery requiring a special explanation. It is the ordinary and expected result of 4,500 years. We should name, too, the honest emotional pull of the disputed remains, because it is part of why the mystery grips us. When bones were found in the Red Pyramid, there was a natural, powerful wish for them to be the king, for the lost Sneferu to be found at last in his own perfect tomb. That wish is worth noticing and worth setting gently aside, for it is exactly the kind of hope that can lead us to believe more than the evidence allows. The careful scholar must resist it, must say plainly that the remains are uncertain, that they may not be the king, however much we might wish. Otherwise, there is a discipline in that honesty, a refusal to let longing outrun proof, and it is the discipline that separates real Egyptology from wishful storytelling. We would love to have found Sneferu. We have not with certainty. And saying so clearly, resisting the pull of the hopeful story, is itself a small act of respect, both for the evidence and for the king whose true fate we are trying to understand. So that is the evidence and the strangeness within it. The empty chambers mapped and recorded by generations of scholars, the disputed and fragmentary bones in the Red Pyramid, which may or may not be the king, and which we cannot, in honesty, claim as his, the staggering odds against any royal body at all surviving 4,500 years of robbery and collapse and slow decay. The fringe claims that the empty tombs prove the pyramids were not tombs, met and answered plainly by the overwhelming evidence that they were. Beyond doubt, tombs that were robbed. The genuine mysteries that remain honestly and openly acknowledged rather than hidden away. And the steady reminder that much of Egypt is still buried beneath the sand, and the long story still unfolding. From all of this, we can say, with reasonable confidence, though never with full certainty, what most likely became of the lost body of the gentle King Sneferu. And now, as our night deepens toward its close and the desert outside grows quiet and dark, let us step back from the evidence and the debates and ask, softly, what this strange and enduring mystery finally means. So we come, in the quiet of the deep night. To the meaning of it all, we have searched 3 great pyramids for a lost king and found only silence. We have followed the tomb robbers across the centuries and watched them empty the houses of eternity. We have weighed the evidence and set aside the false theories and faced the honest limits of what we can know. What does it all mean, this mystery of the vanished king, and what can we carry with us as we drift toward sleep? Let us begin with the great irony at the heart of it, and let it settle slowly. Sneferu, more than almost any ruler who ever lived, tried to defeat death. He did not accept that he would die and vanish. He fought against it with all the wealth and power of a kingdom, building not 1 tomb but 3, each a mountain of stone, each designed to preserve his body for eternity. He gave more thought and more effort to the survival of his body than perhaps anyone before him. And he failed. His body is gone, lost so completely that we cannot find even a certain trace of it. The harder he built, the more completely he disappeared. Let that sink in for a moment. The greatest tomb builder in history lies in none of his tombs. The man who did the most to preserve his body is the one whose body is most thoroughly lost. There is a deep and humbling lesson in that, about the limits of even the mightiest human effort against the forces of time and greed. And yet, if we stop there, we miss the strangest and most beautiful part of the story. For Sneferu did achieve a kind of immortality, though not the kind he built for. He wanted his body to survive, and it did not. But something else survived, something he may have valued less, and that something has lasted 4,500 years and endures to this night. His name survived, his memory survived, the story of who he was, the gentle king, the beneficent ruler, the maker of beautiful things, the builder of the first true pyramids, survived. For 1,000 years after his death, the Egyptians spoke his name with warmth, and told tales of his goodness, even as his body lay lost in the dark. And 4,500 years later, here we are, in the quiet of the night, speaking his name again, telling his story again, keeping his memory alive. The tomb robbers took his body and his gold. They could not take his name. This is not science fiction. This strange survival of a man through nothing but memory and story across 4,500 years. It is the simple, true fact of how Sneferu actually achieved the eternity he longed for, not through the preservation of his body, which failed, but through the preservation of his name, which succeeded beyond anything he could have imagined. There is a profound irony in this, worth sitting with in the dark. The Egyptians believed that to preserve a person, you had to preserve their body, and so they built the pyramids. But it turned out that the body was the one thing they could not keep. What they could keep, what actually lasted, was the name, the memory, the story, carried not in stone or flesh, but in the minds of the living, passed down from generation to generation, from the ancient Egyptians who revered Sneferu to the scholars who studied him to you, tonight, hearing his story. The Egyptians had a saying, a belief, that to speak the name of the dead was to make them live again. They meant it as a kind of ritual. But there is a truth in it that goes beyond ritual. A truth we can feel, that a person does live on in a real sense, as long as they are remembered, as long as their name is spoken and their story told. By that measure, Sneferu is more alive tonight than many people who died only yesterday. For his name is spoken, his story told, his memory kept 4,500 years after his body was lost. Consider what this means for how we think about the missing body. We began the night treating it as a loss, a failure, a mystery of absence, and it is those things, but it is also seen another way. A strange kind of success. Sneferu wanted to last forever. He has lasted forever, or as near to forever as human things come. He is remembered, studied, spoken of, wondered at 4,500 years on. The particular means he chose, the preservation of his body, failed. But the end he sought, to endure, to not be forgotten, to matter across the ages, that he achieved more completely than almost anyone in history. His empty tombs are not only monuments to failure, they are, in their strange way, monuments to a success he did not expect. the survival of the king, not in his body, but in the memory of humankind. And there is a gentleness in the particular way he is remembered, which deepens the meaning. Sneferu is not remembered as a tyrant, or a conqueror, or a monster. He is remembered as good, the beneficent king, the gentle ruler, the maker of beautiful things. Of all that might have survived of him, what survived is the memory of his goodness. His body was lost, his treasure stolen, his tomb emptied, but the memory that came down through the ages was a warm one, a kind one. There is something deeply moving in that, and something hopeful. It suggests that what most endures of a person, in the end, is not their power or their monuments or even their body, but the quality of how they were remembered, the mark they left on the hearts of others. Sneferu built the greatest tombs in the world, and they could not preserve his body, but his goodness was preserved, carried in memory across 1,000 years and more, and it is his goodness, as much as his pyramids, that we remember tonight. Let that sink in, as the night grows deep and still, that the founder of the Pyramid Age, who built 3 mountains to hold his body, achieved his true immortality through none of them, but through the memory of who he was, a memory of goodness that no robber could ever steal, and no collapse could ever bury, and no passing of the ages could ever quite erase. The stone failed him, the body was lost, but the name endured, and the goodness endured, and both of them endure still, even now tonight. Here, in this quiet telling in the dark, that is the deepest meaning of the mystery of the lost body of Sneferu, that a man may lose his body, and still, in the ways that most matter survive, that memory can outlast stone. That goodness, once it enters the story of a people, can travel across 4,500 years, and reach us still warm. In the dark, the king vanished from his tombs, but he did not vanish from history, nor from memory, nor from the quiet wonder of those who still tell his story. And in that difference between the lost body and the living name lies the whole strange and gentle consolation of his story. There is another thread worth drawing out here, about the whole civilization and its great wager against death. The Egyptians staked everything on the preservation of the body. They built their whole vision of eternity upon it. The mummification, the sealed tombs, the pyramids, the endless care for the physical remains. It was one of the most determined efforts any people has ever made to defeat death, to hold on to the physical self against the dissolution that claims us all. And the mystery of the missing kings tells us that this great wager on its own terms was lost. The bodies were not preserved. The robbers and the ages took them. If the survival of the person truly depended on the survival of the body, as the Egyptians believed, then nearly all their kings, by their own reckoning, were lost. It is a sobering thought, and it casts the empty tombs in a poignant light, not just as robbed monuments, but as the failed centerpiece of a civilization's whole hope of eternity. And yet, here is the turn, the thing that redeems the sadness. The Egyptians were wrong, in a way, about what would preserve their kings, but they were right, without fully knowing it, about something deeper. For alongside the mummies and the pyramids, they also did something else. They wrote the names, they carved the images, they told the stories, they kept the memory, and it is these, not the bodies, that actually carried the kings across the ages to us. Sneferu survives not because his body was preserved, for it was not, but because his name was written, and his story was told, and his memory was kept. The Egyptians built 2 paths to eternity, without quite realizing that only one of them would hold, the path of the body, which failed, and the path of the name, which endured. In caring so much for the name, even as they cared for the body, they stumbled onto the true immortality, the one that does not depend on flesh or stone, the one that lives in memory and story and the minds of those who come after. This is why, perhaps, the loss of the body need not sadden us as much as it first seems to. For Sneferu has what he most deeply wanted, which was to endure, to not be forgotten, to matter across time. He wanted the wrong thing, the body, and got the right thing, the memory, and the right thing is the one that lasted. When you speak his name tonight, when you follow his story down towards sleep, you are giving him the very immortality he built 3 mountains to secure, and giving it to him more surely than the mountains ever could. The pyramids failed to preserve him. This quiet telling, and 1,000 tellings like it across the ages succeeded. There is something wonderful in that, something that turns the whole sad mystery gently toward the light. The king who lost his body lives on in the story, and the story is the truer tomb, the one that cannot be robbed. There is a further, quieter meaning to draw out, about the relationship between what we build and what we are. Sneferu poured himself into stone, into 3 vast monuments meant to carry his body and his memory into eternity. And the stone endures, the pyramids still stand, 4,500 years on, among the most enduring things human beings have ever made. But the stone did not, in the end, do what he most wanted. It did not preserve him. What preserved him was something he could not build, something lighter than stone and stronger than stone. The memory carried in the minds of the living passed from generation to generation, from the ancient Egyptians who loved him to us who wonder at him now. There is a lesson in that about the difference between monuments and memory, between the things we build to be remembered and the remembering itself. The monuments help. The pyramids are why we still speak of Sneferu at all. But it is the memory, the story, the human act of not forgetting, that is the true vessel of his immortality. The stone is only the prompt. The memory is the life. And this, in the end, is a hopeful thought to carry into sleep. Hopeful for Sneferu, and perhaps for all of us. For most of us, we'll build no pyramids. We'll leave no monuments of stone to outlast the ages. But the deeper truth of Sneferu's story is that the monuments were never what mattered most. What mattered, what lasted, was how he was remembered. The goodness attached to his name, the story worth telling. And that kind of endurance is open to anyone, for it is made not of stone, but of the marks we leave on others, the memory of who we were and how we treated the people around us. Sneferu is remembered as good, and that simple memory outlived his body, and outlived his gold, and outlived even, in the ways that matter most, his 3 mighty tombs of stone. Of everything he was and everything he built, it is the goodness that traveled furthest and lasted longest, reaching all the way to us, tonight, across 4,500 years of darkness. There is a quiet comfort in that. A gentle thought for the edge of sleep, that what most endures of a life is not what we build, but who we were and how we are remembered. So the mystery of Sneferu's lost body is not, in the end, only a tale of robbery and loss. It is a tale about what truly lasts and what does not. The body, which he strove so hard and so expensively to keep, did not last, for all his 3 great mountains of stone. The name, which lasts by memory alone and asks for no monument at all, did last and lasts still. And of the 2, it was the lighter thing, the name that proved the stronger, outliving all the heavy stone that was meant to guard the flesh. And there is a quiet peace in that realization, a soft and steadying peace, well suited to the edge of sleep and the deep stillness of the late hour. We spend so much effort trying to hold on to things, to preserve and secure and make permanent. Sneferu's story whispers that the things we can hold in stone are not, in the end, the things that last, and that what endures is lighter and stranger and gentler than that. A name, a memory, a story of who we were and how we were loved. The gentle king lost his body and kept his name. He reached for eternity through stone and flesh, and found it, instead, in memory and story, in the quiet and unbreakable keeping of a name across the ages. Let that be the thought we carry down into the quiet, as the desert grows dark around the 3 empty tombs and the stars come out, one by one, above the silent stone. And now the night grows deep, and it is time to let the mystery settle and to draw our long search gently to its close. There is no need, now, to solve anything, or to hold on to every detail. Let the story soften, the way the sharp edges of the day soften as sleep draws near. Let us walk, one last slow time, through the world of the lost king, and then let it fade, like the light fading from the desert at the end of the day. Picture the desert at night, 4,500 years and more since Sneferu was laid to rest. The sand cool and pale under a vast sky crowded with stars, and rising from the desert, dark against the stars, the three great pyramids of the lost king. The strange tower of Midam above its mound of rubble, and at Dashur, the bent shape of the one that changed its mind, and beside it, the great smooth mountain of the Red Pyramid. Three monuments, standing silent in the starlight, as they have stood through all the long ages, and within each of them, deep inside the stone, a dark and empty chamber, cool and still, where a king was meant to lie for eternity. Hold that image gently as you drift. The three pyramids in the starlight, and the quiet empty chambers at their hearts, keeping their long silence in the dark. Remember the king whose body is lost. Sneferu, the founder of the Pyramid Age, the builder of the first true pyramids, the father of the man who built the Great Pyramid. Remember that he was remembered. Above all, as good, a gentle and beneficent king, the maker of beautiful things spoken of with warmth for 1,000 years after his death. Remember that he tried, harder than almost anyone, to preserve his body for eternity, building 3 great tombs to hold him. And remember that he failed in that, and yet succeeded in something greater. For his name and his memory have lasted 4,500 years, and are spoken still tonight, in the quiet. Remember the 3 empty tombs, and the search we made through them. At Midam, the descending passage into darkness, and the empty chamber, perhaps never used. At the bent pyramid, the 2 entrances and the 2 systems of chambers, all empty, and the satellite pyramid beside it, empty too. At the Red Pyramid, the long descent into the beautiful corbelled chambers, and at the heart, only the disputed fragments and the deep silence. No certain king. 3 great mountains, and in all of them, the same absence, the same quiet emptiness where a king should be. Remember the long history that emptied them, the tomb robbers, old as the pyramids themselves, drawn by the gold sealed within, the blocking stones defeated, the passages breached, the chambers stripped, the bodies destroyed in the search for the treasure in the wrappings. The long rhythm of order and collapse, the ages of weakness when the guard on the tombs failed and the robbers came. The stripping of the pyramids for their stone, 4,500 years of robbery and decay, against which no body could survive. This is what became of the lost king, taken, most likely by robbers in the deep past, his body destroyed, his treasure carried off, his great tomb left empty and echoing. And remember the strange consolation at the end of the search, that though his body was lost, his name endured. That though the stone failed to hold him, memory held him and holds him still. That the tomb robbers took his gold and his body, but could not take his story, or his goodness, or his name. That the king who vanished from his tombs did not vanish from history, but lives on, in a way, as long as he is remembered, as long as his story is told, as long as, on some quiet night, someone speaks his name and wonders at his mystery. Sneferu wanted to last forever, and in the only way that truly lasts, through memory, through story, through the warmth of how he was remembered, he has. Let us linger a little longer in the quiet before we let it all go, and let the peace of the desert night settle fully over us. There is no hurry now, and nothing left to solve. The search is done, and it ended not in a body but in a deeper kind of finding, the understanding that the king endures in memory, though his tomb stands empty. Think of the desert at night, vast and still and cool, the sand pale beneath the sky, crowded with more stars than you could ever count. Think of how many nights have passed over the 3 pyramids, 4,500 years of nights, one after another, after another. The stars wheeling slowly overhead, the moon rising and setting, the great stones standing silent and patient through every one of them, keeping their long and faithful watch over the desert and the empty chambers in the memory of the vanished king. And think how small and how peaceful this one night is within all that time. Here at the end of the day, with the ancient mystery softly told and gently laid to rest, think of the river too, the great Nile flowing quietly through the dark, as it has flowed through all the ages of Egypt, past the pyramids and the tombs, under the same stars that shone on Sneferu when he was laid to rest. The river does not hurry. It flows slowly, steadily, patiently, on and on through the quiet dark, indifferent to the rise and fall of kingdoms, to the building and the robbing of tombs, to the losing and the remembering of kings. Let your breathing slow to that ancient rhythm, the rhythm of the river, calm and deep and unhurried. In and out, slow and steady, flowing gently on through the warm and starlit night. Like the dark water moving softly past the reeds toward the distant sea, there is a deep peace in that slowness. The peace of things that endure, the peace of the river and the desert and the patient, silent stone. And think one last time of the lost king himself, resting somewhere beyond all finding, at peace in the deep silence of the ages. We could not find his body, and perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps some things are meant to return to the quiet and be let go. He built his mountains, and they still stand. He earned his memory, and it still endures. His name was spoken here tonight more than once, and in the speaking he lived again, a little. In just the way the Egyptians themselves believed the dead could live once more through the gentle speaking of their names. And now he may rest, as you will rest. His story told, his name kept. His goodness remembered in the long and gentle quiet at the end of all his striving. There is no sorrow in it now, only a soft and ancient peace. The peace of a mystery gently held, the peace of a good king remembered, the peace of the desert at night beneath the eternal stars. So let the images fade now, gently, one by one. The three pyramids in the starlight, slowly dimming, the empty chambers settling into the dark. The lost king resting wherever he rests, beyond all finding, at peace in the deep silence of the ages. There is no sorrow in it now, only a quiet wonder and a gentle peace. The mystery remains unsolved. And that is, well, some mysteries are meant to be wondered at, not solved. And this is one of them. Let it remain softly, in the dark. A question without a final answer, ancient and calm, asking nothing of you but that you rest. Breathe slowly now, and let each breath carry you a little deeper toward sleep, the way each course of stone once carried the pyramids a little higher toward the sky. There is nothing to reach for, nothing to hold, nothing left to search for tonight. The three empty chambers keep their silence, and you may let that silence be a comfort now. The deep and ancient quiet of the stone, cool and still and peaceful, holding nothing but the dark. Let the mystery rest where it lies, unsolved and gentle, and let yourself rest with it. Here in the quiet at the end of the long night, let the image of the three pyramids stay with you as you drift. Dark and calm against the crowded stars, standing patient in the desert as they have stood for 4,500 years, and as they will stand for 4,500 more. They ask nothing of the countless nights that passed over them, and they ask nothing of this one. They simply stand, silent and enduring, keeping their long watch over the sleeping sand, over the empty chambers, over the memory of the gentle king who built them, and vanished from them and endures. Still, in the telling. Let them stand in your mind, softly growing dimmer now, fading gently into the dark as sleep draws near. Let the desert grow dark, let the pyramids fade into the night. Let the lost king keep his long silence, and let his name spoken once more tonight drift out into the quiet and settle, like starlight over the sleeping sand. The search is done, and it ended gently, not in a body but in a name kept, and a story told. The mystery keeps quiet and unsolved, as some mysteries are meant to. And you may return to it whenever you wish, on some other quiet night. For now, let it go softly, and let yourself drift down into the deep and gentle dark, carried on the slow current of the ancient river beneath the same eternal stars that have watched over the 3 empty tombs for 4,500 years. The story of the lost body of Sneferu is told. The 3 pyramids stand silent in the starlight. The chambers are empty and still. The gentle king is gone from them, and yet remembered still. The long night has come, and there is nothing left to do but rest. So let the mystery settle, and let the desert grow quiet, and carry with you down into sleep the image of those 3 dark pyramids beneath the stars, and the memory of the good king who built them and vanished from them, and endures still in the telling. Sleep well,